that's actually where sketching really comes into play, which is helping you brainstorm all those different possibilities and narrow down which one you need for your data set and your audience.
Today I'm with my friend Anne Emery, who's a data visualization scientist. Anne, who are you? What do you know? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
This is a tricky one because the field that I'm in, data visualization, is new-ish and it's transdisciplinary. So we kind of get to make up our own titles. So I think the title that fits the best is Data Visualization Designer, which basically means I help people turn numbers into pictures. So I take spreadsheets of raw data and I train people how to turn those into charts and tables and diagrams. I work at Depict Data Studio and I've been self-employed, running my own company, leading my own team for about 7 years now.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today. I think Data Viz kind of overlaps with sketchnoting because our job as sketchnoters is to sit in the room and visualize information. Now, it's not always data. It can be like speech, it could be images, it can be a lot of things, but data is also a huge part of presentations, especially in the science community and anything that has any amount of technicality to it. So I know I've sat in sessions where I see data and it may or may not be depicted very well. And my job as a sketchnoter is to either figure out, do I just copy what the presentation is, or do I create my own depiction of that, which we're going to get into later. So first, can you give us a little bit of an insight as to Data Viz? Like, what is it? We've all seen charts. Is that all that Data Viz is?
I mean, it's not that complicated. It's supposed to be really simple. It's supposed to be the idea that you take all the data that an organization might have, or all the data that maybe a speaker shares in their conference presentation, which could be, it could be like literally millions of numbers that are sitting behind the scenes in cells of a spreadsheet, or it could be like 10 little numbers sitting in an itty bitty table in a spreadsheet, but that you take that and you're supposed to simplify it and pull out the key points in a chart or in a couple of charts. There are different ways of sharing it. So it could be a single chart, on a slide in a presentation. It could be a dashboard that the viewer is clicking through and interacting with themselves, but it's essentially just graphing numbers and trying to make it both visually appealing, but also accurate, but also like simple without being dumbed down too.
So what kind of skills does someone need to have that experience?
So sometimes people think it's like, I'll just make my chart look pretty. I'll just pick out pretty colors. Sometimes that's the first thing that people think about. It's colors, of course, but it's also how you use those colors to pull just one key finding to attention at a time. I've got some examples I can show you later where you essentially gray out most things in the graph and then you just highlight one thing at a time with a darker color. It's also things like, how do you use text? How do you write the title of your graph? You might have a subtitle. There might be a sidebar or a call out box that draw attention to a few key points. Like that would be more for a written document, like a handout or a report. It could also be the text that you say if you're presenting some slides. And it's also things that I bet you run into a lot, which is what type of visual do you use? Do you draw or make a pie chart or a bar chart or a line chart? There are a lot of familiar chart types. I'd say like pies, bars, lines, everybody's seen. But then as you learn more and more, you realize this can be really fun, but really daunting. You realize there's this whole world of chart types out there, like Sankey diagrams and tree maps and dot plots and hex maps. There's dozens and dozens of chart types to choose from. But that's actually where sketching really comes into play, which is helping you brainstorm all those different possibilities and narrow down which one you need for your data set and your audience.
So how do you use drawing in your business and your consulting and your workshops and all the work that you do?
I think there's probably two main ways that I use sketching and that I train other people to use sketching, because I've been a fan of drawing for a long time. I'm old school with things like to-do lists. I mean, I use Asana for project management, but I also, I have like my regular notebook that's always open on my desk so I can sketch graphs and write notes to myself all day, every day. But there's probably two main ways that I use sketching. And then I've got some examples to show you too of public facing examples from my blog. So the first way that drawing or sketching comes into play is really to help me narrow down what chart type I'm going to use. So here I'm getting real old school. I'll show you. I set the timer on my phone and I'll set it for about 10 to 15 minutes. I'll have maybe my spreadsheet with my tabulated data pulled up. And I literally spend 10 or 15 minutes forcing myself to draw out all the different examples or ideas I can think of. So I think about like, okay, this table of data, maybe it's a pie chart. How many slices would it have? Which slice would be dark or light to draw attention to? Is it a bar chart? Should the bars be vertical or should they be horizontal? Maybe it's a stacked bar chart. Maybe it's a map. And when I started doing this brainstorming process, I've been doing this, I don't know, almost a decade now. I wonder who taught me. I have no idea. I'll have to go back in my archives and think about where I came up with this idea from. But when I started doing it, I would come up with like 3 ideas. That was about it because I was only familiar with a few chart types. And now I can come up with like 10 or 15 different ideas. So it's just really, really helpful to sit down, I think, on paper first. A lot of times people in data careers like me, we're tempted to just start making our chart in our spreadsheet, or I use Excel a lot, Tableau or Power BI or other popular tools out there. And a lot of them have this, what do they call it? They'll call it like a chart suggestions guide, or it'll be some type of AI built into the software that you can click on it and it gives you ideas for charts. So that's really tempting to do. People think like, I'll just click a button and the software is going to do everything for me.
It's actually one question I had is, do you ever get overwhelmed with which chart do I use? Like now that you know more than 3 different chart types, how do you pick how to display your data, especially when there's so many to pick from?
That can be overwhelming, like maybe the first time, I think. But as you go, you realize sometimes the audience wants one chart for one format and they want a different chart for another format. Like, let's say a 1-pager or an infographic that's supposed to be more high level. It's like the key facts about a topic. You could use simple icons to show like, you know, a little icon kind of about the topic or the category. And like 15% of people said blah, 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 blah. Just an at a glance view. So that's one idea. It's like perfectly correct for a 1-pager. But then maybe, let's say you have a technical report. Maybe it's a 50-page report designed for more the data people themselves, the people in the weeds with the data. You might need tables for that report. So sometimes you get to pick 2 or 3 of your options that you've brainstormed and you realize they're appropriate for different audiences or different settings. So that's really helpful too, to think like, wow, I get to keep lots of these ideas I've come up with, and they are usually multiple ideas are correct, which is great.
And then also, like sketchnoters do the same thing. Like when we're creating a sketch note, at least professionally, like if someone pays you to come to their presentation and take sketch notes, you have to realize, okay, they're going to be reading my notes. What do they care about? Do they understand this stuff? What colors match the brand or match the vibe of the talk? And so keeping in mind the audience is like super crucial to anything sketchnoting. And it sounds like it's really crucial for data as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead and pull up your examples. We'd love to see those.
So this is a million years ago, 2016, right? I told you I've been sketching forever. So I had taken this is a fictional data set, but I was working with a theater in Chicago. So I was thinking of their data as I was writing this blog post. So the fictional idea is like, how many tickets did you sell to this Chicago theater via your online website or over the phone or in person at the ticket booth? You know, so you've got like, long story short, you've got a typical table, but then there's so many correct ways you could do this. Like you could just focus on how many tickets are sold online each year. You know, is that number going up? Is it going down? Is it staying flat? Is it zigzag where the pattern really changes year to year? You know, so there's so many options. I think in this blog post, how many ideas did I come with? Up with 2, 3, 4. There's so many, there's so many correct options. I don't know, this many-ish. Here's another one where I used to draw them really big. And then as you get faster, you're kind of like, meh, small sketches are fine, little 1 inch by 1 inch ideas. But this is truly what my notebooks look like at the beginning of a project. So really I'd say the first way that I use sketching is brainstorming for me behind the scenes. Sometimes I'll share these drafts with the audience, but usually it's just for me, just to get like all the ideas out on paper. A second way though that I use sketching that is critical, that I feel like I have to do, I feel like I can't just do this on my computer, is once I have, each individual graph figured out, I have to think about how do I arrange them all on a page or on a screen? Because like sometimes you just have a graph at a time, let's say on a PowerPoint slide. But a lot of times you have multiple graphs together, like an infographic, or a handout. You might have 4 graphs or 10 graphs together on a page. On a dashboard, you might have 5 or 10 graphs together on a page. So I've got some examples here where I'll use good old paper and pencil just to figure out like what might this layout look like. Like if I want to have, let's say, a stacked column chart with also some sample quotes, how might I arrange that on the page so that it fits? Or this one is, I actually grabbed some sticky notes to help me arrange the page and think about, this was going to be how long did this end up being? I want to say a page front and back was the final for this project. And we had a lot of different metrics or indicators that we might need. So I wanted to make sure that related topics went together. So we started with some introductory information or some overview information, and then graphs about this topic were grouped together, and graphs about this topic were grouped together. So in this particular project, there were actually 3 of us, I think, in a conference room together. We just made one sticky note in a conference room together. We made one sticky note per topic and just like literally put them around on the page to make sure it all kind of went together.
Yeah, that's a really cool way of figuring out how to lay out your page, just because like with sketchnoting, so many people think like in a live setting, you only get one chance and then it's over. So you're not really sure what's going to happen and how to lay out your page. Someone could share one graph in one session, and then in the next session, they could share 10 graphs and you're like, oh, I didn't plan for that. So I like your method of like sticky notes. Like, yeah, you can always go back and change your sketch notes, but you could also just maybe take notes for yourself and then create a sketch note after the fact and rearrange your page perfectly with all those graphs in the right places. So that's really cool.
Do you ever do the sketchnoting where you have the big mural size paper and you're drawing with marker live?
There's a difference. So sketchnoting is usually like small in notebooks like this, or like sheets of paper, or maybe an iPad. And graphic recording is like the huge murals like you see at conferences. And so graphic recording and sketchnoting are really similar, but one is a lot larger and usually for like a purpose of sharing with an audience rather than just like for your personal notes. But yeah, I've definitely been in sessions where I'm graphic recording with my markers and the person just starts sharing graph after graph after graph. And I'm like, I do not have space for this. I have to figure out what the one data story is and just capture that one thing.
My heart goes out to you because we've talked about this offline before. I wish that the presenters would know what their key point was. That's hard though, because a lot of times data people like me we're in the weeds of the spreadsheets or in the databases so much that stepping back and taking, figuring out what the bigger picture is of what we're really trying to say, that's really difficult to do. I wish in a perfect world, the speakers would know exactly what their key point was. It'd be so clear as they're talking, which would make your job easier,
But it's also encouraging for the person who's in the room sketchnoting or graphic recording, because it's not your fault. Like if the presenter doesn't know how to speak well and present their data well, like you can only do as good a job as the data that you're given. So if you're a sketchnoter or graphic recorder out there and you feel overwhelmed, just know that it's probably not your fault. The speaker just doesn't know how to communicate well, and you can just do the best you can. So everyone gets a pass here and there, and sometimes it's your fault and sometimes it's not.
I bet as the speaker that's in the weeds of all the data, I bet it's so helpful to see that big recording of their talk, because it probably helps them come up with like, oh yeah, that is what I was trying to say. They just couldn't quite articulate it in the moment.
Yeah, I think
ideally you know in advance, but
yeah, I've definitely been in sessions where I'm like at the back of the room sketching, and then as people are leaving, they're like reading over my notes and they're like, oh yeah, that's exactly what they talked about, but visualize, that's so cool. And it's like a light bulb goes off. So hopefully the speaker can use that graphic recording or Sketchnote for their own purposes. But if nothing else, at least the audience is getting some value out of it too. But one question I had is on the topic of like speakers and presentations. Are there any questions about ethics with data? So if I'm a sketchnoter and I see a pie chart on the slide, but I think it might be easier to draw or faster as a bar chart, is that okay? Or are there any other like weird ethics questions that I should think about?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I'm generally not worried about ethics in data visualization. Like it's a lot of things maybe keep me up at night in my career, keep me going in my career. And it's more like I worry about things like all the data that we have that's not being used. It just sits in spreadsheets. It never sees the light of day. Nobody ever has time to go through it. Things like that bother me. Ethics comes up here and there. So about a decade ago, I was an internal data analyst at a big nonprofit in DC. And one of my tasks, among many other things, busy nonprofit, like most nonprofits, right? One of my tasks was doing trainings for the staff to just raise up our data literacy levels and teach them how to analyze the data themselves. You know, there's only a couple data people like me, hundreds of staff, so we really had to train them to do a lot themselves. And I remember sitting in the computer lab. There were probably 20 staff members in there, and I was training them like, here's how you take your spreadsheet, here's how you do some basic formulas or pivot tables in Excel, here's what you click on to make graphs. And one of the staff members, she kind of looked like, I don't know, just distraught, stressed. I could see it on her face. Like she was thinking about things that were making her a little bit stressed. So I was like, hey, what are you thinking about? How's it going? Is there anything I can help you with? And she had this aha moment, and she was like, I realized that I could manipulate the data to say anything I want. And she was like, I could like trick people with data. I could lie with statistics. And that made her like nervous to realize she did have that power to be completely unethical and hide numbers if she wanted to. Not that she did, but she realized like, whoa, I have that ability to be a totally horrible human being if I wanted to be with statistics. I have never personally met anybody in the hundreds of workshops I've done who purposefully lies with statistics or does anything unethical. I think everybody I've met in these workshops has like really good intentions. So I will teach you though, a key strategy that I teach people to use and that I follow too in all my consulting work. And it's for people who are writing reports, but I think you could take this method and apply it to other settings too. I work with a lot of, federal government agencies, state government agencies, foundations that are managing big grants, universities that are managing big projects. So a lot of the groups that I work with are report focused. They might also have slideshows and stuff, but a lot of people are still like writing out a lot of reports. So for reports, the traditional thing that we see is you just write a report, and it might go on for like literally 100 pages in a lot of these scenarios. Think of like required government reports that a lot of people have to write. So instead of having a 100-page report, I teach people to do something called the 30-3-1 approach. So you have the body of your report. You have to keep it to just 30 pages, which is really daunting for people who are in the weeds of data, because you're like, what do I do with the other 70 that I'm used to? You keep the other 70, but you just push everything back to the appendix in the back. So you have 30 pages of summary pages, high level key points, takeaway findings, the so what, but then you have unlimited appendices. So you have your 30-page report, but then also write a 3-pager and also a 1-pager. And it could be like 2 pages, who cares? But it's the idea that you have something like really short and sweet and a mid-range and then like everything. And by having those 3, it really takes the burden off as the designer, because you don't have to feel like, am I choosing the right findings for the 1-pager? Or how do I know what deserves to go in the 30-page body of the report? It's like all the weight's off. You don't have to worry about, am I being ethical or not? Am I being transparent or not? Because the appendices have your back. Like you could have a 30-page report with 70 pages of tables and appendices to be really transparent and to show like, I'm not lying with the data. Here's all the numbers and all the decimal places and all the details so that anybody who wants more information has it. So it's great, like, because it takes the burden off our shoulders of figuring out like, what is it that matters? And the audience just also has proof that you're being ethical and unbiased and transparent because they can literally just flip to the back and see tons of numbers themselves. So I love, love, love this. There's this whole movement of open data, of requiring governments and government funded projects to share their raw data online. And then you can't be unethical or lie with your data at all because it's there. Somebody can check your work. You know, it's on a website or it's in the back of a report.
The things that you were talking about remind me of sketchnotes. So sketchnotes are like a summary of what happened, whether that's a presentation or a talk or even like a book you read. And I think a lot of sketchnoters feel that pressure to make everything perfect and accurate, but it's like, hey, you're just the one pager. The 30 pages available if you need to go there, but you're just the one pager, the introduction. So no pressure on the sketchnoter because you're the introduction, not the appendix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of like, I bet you've seen movie trailers like this. This is a good connection. Like, let's say a new film is coming out and they might have the 30-second trailer, you know, the 30-second teaser. That's like what your sketch notes are or what your visual note taking is. It's the overview. You know, it's supposed to be like the thing that grabs people's attention. But then a lot of times movie trailers will also have maybe a 2-minute trailer that you can watch on YouTube, or there might be like the extended 5-minute trailer for the diehard fans. So I think we see this a lot in real life as you see things like there's, you know, all this information you could display, and just remembering like the format that we produce is only one of many, many formats. Like a Sketchnote version is one of the formats. It's not the only thing. You also have the presenter's slides. The presenter probably also has a website with more papers or more publications on it. So I think that just, like, for me, really frees me up to remember I'm contributing to the full story in a format that is really going to be the perfect format for a lot of people. The really busy audiences who don't have time to like go through all the data themselves, they get to see the visual summary.
So one thing I really like about watching your YouTube videos and just seeing all of your stuff online is how you show people how to make their data easier for people to understand. So can you show us some examples of like before and after, like how we can make data look better?
This is what I see a lot of charts looking like. Pie charts are not evil, but 7-slice pie charts are. So it's not that you ever use pie charts, but pie charts are more for like 2 slices, maybe 3 slices. They're supposed to be the overview. There's a lot of research on chart types dating back 30 years till the 80s. There's lots of peer-reviewed studies saying like, guess what? Pie charts with 10,000 slices are really hard to read. I think this is pretty intuitive too though. So like, this is a real life slide, kind of. I've anonymized it, as you can tell, but it was like 2 pie charts next to each other with 7 slices each. And I think what we have to do, because do you see how the one on the left is one time period and then one on the right, different time periods? You're supposed to be like zigzagging your eyes back and forth. That's expecting a lot. You know, you're like, wait, what is this slice? And then let me look at this slice and let me look at this slice. And every time your eyes move, you just lose a little bit of time. So if this is our before, this is what not to do, right? Like, don't have all these charts with all these colors, with all these itty bitty slices that are hard to read. One easy one, we touched on this earlier, is you simply gray out everything, kind of push everything to the background, and then highlight one key finding at a time. That simple use of color is such a quick win. If you're doing this drawing wise, I think you just draw all the slices. You just like shade in one of them. That's pretty easy to do as the sketchnoter. Or if you're doing this on a software program, you literally just gray out everything. You click on the chart, gray it all out, click on it again to highlight one thing at a time. That's
easy. I feel very validated by this because in my courses and my workshops, I always teach people keep it simple with color because it's so easy to overwhelm visually. And so I always use 3 colors or less for the most part. Sometimes I'll use more if they're like in the same color family, but yeah, like looking at a chart, with 10 different slices, which you shouldn't do in the first place. But if you already have that down, coloring those 10 different slices is one, time consuming for the sketchnoter, and two, you have to have 10 colors, which most people aren't going to be doing. And I feel like it's just so much easier if you just use one color to highlight the one slice that you want people to look at, like you just said. And then also the other thing that I tell people in my workshops is don't think of sketchnotes like a coloring book that you have to just fill in every picture, but think of it as a highlighter. So you're using that color to highlight the one thing. So it's really cool that we have that parallel in both of our fields. Like, don't highlight or highlight everything that you want people to look at and just leave everything else gray. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think I have not done sketchnoting or visual note taking like you have, but I would think that a lot of presenters might have a slide like this, and then you're listening as they're talking, and they might say something about like, and slice A was the biggest. So that's like ding, ding, ding. That's your note in your head that really what matters is slice A. So that's like, you're listening to all their verbal cues and you're like, oh, let me color in slice A. So that should be a pretty quick win for a lot of us, is simply adjusting the color. There's other things that are a little bit more complex. I'll show you briefly though, just so you can get some ideas. And that comes down to changing chart types. So I would say this is what not to do, but people in data backgrounds like me, we love our bar charts. We love stacked bar charts with like little stacks. We love clustered bar charts with lots of little bar charts next to it. We just love them. It's like all we were trained to do is make bar chart after bar chart. So a lot of times people in my field were tempted to do something like this. We're like, pie charts are evil. I'm not going to do it. I'll do a bar chart instead. It's like timeout, not this one, right? But you can use the same color technique where you pull one key thing to the foreground. It's like the gray plus action color technique saves the day again. So there might be scenarios where people listening want to change like a pie chart to a bar chart. Maybe, I wouldn't say it's foolproof though, because I mean, this is a big old rainbow mess. I don't think this is helping anybody with anything.
Interesting. Yeah, because I like using a lot of grayscale in my sketch notes too, but it's like some of the best notes that I've ever done are the ones that I'm most proud of. It's like just one color, or maybe like colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, like yellow, orange, red, because they're all kind of similar. When it comes to this data, how has creating better visualized data made your job easier or better? Like, has it shot you up above the competition? Has it made you like a leader in the field?
All of those things unintentionally. I never went into working for myself for like, I'm going to be rich and famous or anything like that. Like that was never the goal. I just remember thinking, I have some techniques that I've figured out the long, hard way, like which formulas in Excel save time, or how to use something called pivot tables in Excel, or here's how color can make a difference in graphs, or here's how graph types can make a difference, like the pie chart versus the stacked column chart. And I just remember seeing all these people doing it kind of the long, hard way. And I remember just being really frustrated, thinking like people who I know from conferences, like colleagues of mine, they're staying till 7 or 8 in the office, or they're working on a Saturday. And I remember just thinking like, I bet they've got better things to do with their time. Let me just teach them some time savers to kind of help them do their job better so that they can focus on what really matters. I work with a lot of public health groups like the CDC. I work with a lot of international development groups like State Department, USAID, and like these people are working on big problems. You can't have a bunch of epidemiologists sitting around like wasting their time in Excel. They need to go figure out like, how do you solve the pandemic? People have a lot bigger pressing issues. It's like joking, but not, because, I don't think people have time to be like, let me fiddle with this and learn the long, hard way. So I just went into all of this thinking like, how can I help other people save time so they can really focus on what matters?
Yeah, well, it seems like a public service for me. So thank you for what you do in making people understand data visually. So where can people go to learn more about you, maybe check out your workshops or your resources?
Yeah, the best way to stay in touch is probably through my newsletter, which you can sign up for at depictdatastudio.com. If you just scroll to the bottom, there's a newsletter sign up. And I've also recently added, just in the last couple months, this is so funny because we're talking about like the type of chart to use. When you sign up, you immediately get a PDF that's a 2-page chart chooser that shows not every chart ever invented, but it shows like the top 30 charts that I use on a regular basis. So you get a little preview of each chart type and a little description of when to use it. Like these are for part to whole. These are for geographic proportions. These are for patterns over time.
Oh, cool. Well, I think that would be a helpful resource because I didn't even know there were 30 different types of charts. So now I'm going to go get that.
I bet you've seen most of them before. I bet you'd recognize them. You might just not know what they're called.
Yeah, probably. Well, Anne, thanks so much for joining us today. And we just appreciate your time. So everyone go check out Anne's stuff and learn how to visualize data better from Depict Data Studio.